welcome families together in Youth Power Network. In honor of Pride Month, we're answering questions submitted by youth, parents, and allies of our network. Thank you for everyone who sent us questions, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Imari Wilson. I am the Regional Youth Partner at Youth Power of Families Together.
And I am Zack Kilmer. I am the NISA coordinator for Youth Power of Families Together. Imari and I are both Youth Power staff, young adults, and we're both LGBTQ+. So we decided to do this to answer some questions that people within our network might have. So, Imari, you want to just jump right in?
Yeah, so I think one of the first questions we have is from our LGBTQ youth, and it's how do you deal with the harassment and the people who make judgments? How do you deal with school administrators who won't handle your problems?
All right, we're just started in with the easy questions. Good. Harassment is kind of a big topic. I mean, for most of it sounds like this person who asked this question is definitely school age based on the second part of this. And I was not fully out of the closet in high school. Like a very select number of people knew. I thought I identified as bisexual at the time. I now identify as gay. So I kind of was hiding in the closet at the time. So I didn't get as much harassment as maybe other LGBTQ people faced at the time. I did, however, get some harassment because a lot of people just like made assumptions. Like I did theater, I did things that were considered like feminine, like not the atypical thing that a high school boy are supposed to be interested in. So I mean, maybe I should have just come out of the closet because I basically got harassed for being gay anyway. So I mean, it's a really difficult question, and it's a very I feel like it varies from person to person in terms of in dealing with the harassment and like what to do, because it can be very, very frustrating when teachers and administrators don't take these kind of problems seriously. Amar, do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, lots. But I guess what I kind of lean to is so I found a great comfort in reading when I was in like high school, middle school and stuff, and a lot of like the things that I read was concerning like figuring queerness out, essentially. I didn't know it then, but foreshadowing. And in those books, I just found so many like laws out that I didn't know were laws or were like protections around, me now. So I guess like knowing how to protect yourself from harassment. So like what is the school's procedure on things, who's somebody in the school that you can reach out to, whether it's a friend who would talk to a staff member or a staff member themselves, somebody who has your back. Is there like a GLISTEN, which is like, what is the acronym? Gay, lesbian.
We're professional LGBTQ people, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, but they like you're able to have a gay straight alliance in your school, no matter what school you go to. So if there's a gay straight alliance or there's a resource there that makes you feel safe, that is a place that I lean to, just to make sure I didn't have any issues with harassment.
Yeah. And another thing I would say too is, and this is advice, honestly, I wish I had taken when I was younger, or at least known about. Continue, like, let's say you tell a school administrator and they don't do anything about the harassment you're facing because you're LGBTQ. Find someone else who will listen. And like Imari said, read through every school has a code of conduct, and you have certain rights under the law. Depending on, I mean, it varies widely depending on where you are in the United States. But you do have rights. So if someone is not listening to you, find someone who will, and
Hmm.
continue basically to be a pain. If you don't continue to advocate for yourself and try to keep speaking out, it's just going to keep happening. And I know that's a lot to put on a person who is facing harassment, but unfortunately, it's kind of the truth. So basically, you keep going up the chain and keep talking to administrators, because eventually you will find someone who listen who can do something about it.
All right. You want to move to the next question?
Sure. So the next question we have is also from an LGBTQ youth. If someone who is LGBTQ can't come out to their parents, whom should they tell?
Ooh,
That's a tough one.
so that was literally me when I was in school, and I found great friends, like trustworthy, solid friends who helped me to navigate, like, if I wanted to tell my parents, how I wanted to tell my parents, when to tell my parents, is it safe to, um, and some of those friendships, even their parents were a, I don't know, safe haven for me too. Um, that's my answer. Friends.
Yeah, and this is opinion. This is an opinion of mine that might not necessarily, like, if you ask any other LGBTQ people, they might not agree with this. But if you feel like it is unsafe for you to come out of the closet in general, like, in my opinion, I think it's better to hold off. Like, I
Hmm.
know there are some people I know of who, like, for example, waited until they went to college. So they went to school, they lived away from home for the first time, and they were able to come out in a way that, let's say, unfortunately, it does happen. If it goes bad and your parents don't take it very well, you'll at the very least have somewhere to go that is not the same house where you live with them. Coming out is really important, and it is, like, absolutely crucial to an LGBTQ person's, like, development. But at the same time, you always, always, always want to take your safety into account. And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate, but some people are in situations who they don't feel like it's safe to tell anyone. And in that case, I would say it's perfectly valid to wait until you are in a situation where you feel like it is safe to tell someone.
Yeah, definitely 100% ditto that. Safety is so, like, supreme. You have to take care of yourself first and understand where you're at and what's really needed. Yeah, you got to be safe.
Yeah, and I mean, it this largely depends on, like, the culture of where you are and where you are too. Like, obviously, most of our network and the people we're talking to live in New York State, so there are
Yeah.
a lot of pockets of New York State that are, I would say, safer on average for an LGBTQ person. But if
Hmm.
someone is in a more, like, rural area of the country who that they don't have access to as many resources or understanding people, it's a lot tougher of a situation. And yeah, it's like we've been saying, like, safety should come before basically everything else.
Hmm.
But to get back to the original question, whom should they tell? Basically, anyone if you feel confident that you can tell someone and it will result in a safe result for you, I would say go for it. I think it largely depends on each individual situation. But basically, try do your best to read the situation, and if you can come out to that person safely, then I say go for it.
I agree.
So the next question is actually from a parent of an LGBTQ young person, and the question is, how can I best support my child?
Oh, I think that the best way to support your child who's identifying as LGBTQ or plus is to listen. I think is the best advice I can get. Best advice that I can give. Um, Listen to who they are and what they're expressing, and the fact that they are including you into what can be such a life-changing change for them. And I think it's important to be along with that change and to continue to support them in that change. A lot of communication needs to happen, maybe on both parts, but listening is a great part of that.
Strongly ditto that. Listening is probably the best thing you can do. And the thing I would add to that is just like unconditional love and support. Like a lot of people who are not LGBTQ do not, what they cannot understand is just how terrifying a lot of this stuff can be for an LGBTQ
Mm-hmm.
person. Like coming out is one of the most excruciatingly scary things that someone can go through. And the last thing that someone needs is any kind of like pushback. Like even there might be parts that you as a parent are like resistant to or maybe even like disagree with, but in that moment that they are like coming out to you or like you are beginning to understand that they are LGBTQ, they need love and support because they are going
Mm-hmm.
through, especially if they're a young person or a teenager, adolescent, they're going through something that is absolutely terrifying in a time which is already kind of inherently like stressful just due to like basic like puberty and change of life stuff. So you slather on an entire layer of LGBTQ stuff, and they realize that like they're different and they might have to face a lot of struggles that other people won't have to face. The best possible thing you can do to support a child is giving them unconditional love and support and letting them know that you are absolutely there for them in this potentially really scary time.
Right. Definitely. 100%.
Okay, great.
Okay.
You want to move, or did you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think that one is great. I think that's the best ways when thinking about support, and a parent and youth relationship in general, but especially with LGBTQ youth. Um, so to move on, a question about allyship. What does it mean to be an ally?
That's another big one. Although honestly, I would say a lot of the same answers we just gave for the previous question can apply to this one. Listening
Yes.
is a really big, important thing.
Hmm.
If you're not an LGBTQ person and you want to be the best ally you can be, something you have to understand is that a lot of this stuff you're never going to be able to fully understand because you're not an LGBTQ person, and that's okay. That's just an inherent thing that goes along with this kind of stuff. So listening and doing your best to empathize and understand what an LGBTQ person is going through, I think that's one of the best ways you can be an ally.
Yeah. I I think yes to all of that. I think the quote that immediately came to my mind when I read this question, I think it's a quote, is that allies make space, they don't take up space. Um, so when I think about allyship, it's um, making sure that people in the LGBTQ community have the space and opportunities um, to share their voices, share their stories, and let other people know about whatever platform they're on, and making sure they have access to those spaces, have access to feeling safe from harassment, have access to no judgment zones, um, ensuring that those spaces happen throughout your life makes more space for people in those communities to really step up into the places that they're supposed to be in.
Very well said. And I think something else I wanted to add to that too is that in your journey in becoming an ally, you're going to make mistakes, and that's perfectly okay. I mean, I may make mistakes when dealing with people who not like fall on the LGBTQ spectrum, but don't necessarily fall on my end of the spectrum. Like I make mistakes when dealing with people, but I think the main thing is to recognize your mistake and correct it. Like one of
Hmm.
my favorite ideas, or I think it might be a quote, is the best apology is changed behavior.
Yep.
So if you make a mistake, recognize it and try to do better in the future. One of the, in my opinion, worst things you can do is get defensive. Like, let's say you are in a situation where you use maybe a word that's like outdated or like borders on like slur, and you get an LGBTQ person lets you know that you did that. The correct response to that is to, oh, my bad. I didn't know that was something I shouldn't be doing. I'll do my best to avoid it in the future. And I think a lot of people, how they do respond to that is, well, I didn't mean to. I didn't like, I'm a great ally in other ways. Like, I don't understand why
Hmm.
you're saying it this way. Like, trust me, as a very stubborn, prideful person, I understand the impulse to get defensive. 100% totally get it. But that is the best way you can be an ally is recognize that you're going to make mistakes, that it's okay, and to just try to correct them going forward and to try your best not to get defensive about it if corrected.
Yes, definitely. That's a great point to add. We're all humans. We are not perfect. I am not perfect. We've all had to come to some realizations in life. Uh, so that's a really great point to add, Zach. Thanks.
Okay. Did you want to move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is also from an ally. What is the hardest part of coming out? Again,
Okay.
just going with these low ball, easy to answer questions. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, just surface level.
Um, I really think that is a deeply personal question. Not in that I'm reluctant to answer it, in that it varies wildly from person to person and situation to situation. Um,
I agree.
like the hardest part of coming out for me was, I guess, the length of the process. Like I didn't just like burst out of the closet. I like put a toe out, and then I put a foot out, and then I peeked out, and then I came back in and I just locked it up again, and then I peeked back out again. I'm like, okay, maybe I can put an arm out this time. And I did that for basically 10 years. So, and some other people, they basically just came out all at once, and then they ripped the band-aid off, and it was just a process that was done. And I like, so for me personally, I would say the longevity of my process and what I had to do over the course of time was one of the most difficult parts. But like I
Hmm.
said, that is going to vary wildly from person to person.
Right. I think that's the biggest, like, maybe asterisk to add under this question is like it's individualized. Not everybody's coming out story is going to be exactly the same. Um, I think the hardest part for me with coming out is similar to you, like having to come out in a longer period of time than it takes to take off a band-aid. For me, it was I thought I came out. Turns out that I was in an inception of closets and had to continuously come out. And I think I'm done now. I think I'm really done coming out.
Are you
Of
sure
the
there's no
second time.
additional other closets there
I
in
am
your
hoping
Inception closet?
so. This is a very large closet. It's like it has a lot of walk-in space. So if this is not like the open room, I don't know where I'm going from here. I think also for me personally, a extremely hard part is just constantly having a fear of rejection. Also with like social and economic like stereotypes that come with my life, just having that fear of not having friends or family or you know religious associations involved in my life in the same capacities that I wanted them to be because I prioritize myself and my queerness as much as I prioritize those relationships. That was a big fear for me, and one that has since leveled out, but initially it was a big barrier.
Yeah, and going off of that, and I think this is a concept that can probably apply to, if not all, the wide majority of people coming out. I think it's the fear of change, and not just change, irrevocable, permanent change. Like what
Hmm.
you have to understand about the process of coming out is that it's a very permanent, set in stone thing. You can't. It's not really a genie you can put back in a bottle. So
Right.
once you make that decision and once it's done, the consequences of it are going to happen, whether they're interpersonal relationships or otherwise. And there's once you do it, there's no turning back on that decision. So, and that was one of the scariest things for me, and I think it's why it took me so long, is because
Yeah.
afraid of I was afraid of change, and I was afraid of change that what like once you come out of the closet, there's like basically a storm of stuff that happens that basically immediately becomes outside of your control and is just going to happen to you, whether that be interpersonal relationships, like stuff with your job. Like there's so many things that can happen to you as an LGBTQ person, and once you decide to come out, they're going to happen. And there's essentially, I mean, there is stuff you can do about it, but it was the permanent, irrevocable change that was really scary for me, and I feel like that's probably a common thread amongst many people who are um, face difficulties with coming out.
Okay. Yeah. I think I think out of that, the thing that I held on to with the fear and changing um, is some changes are good. Like change can be
Yeah,
good, um, and thankfully, so um, with having so many changes and fear around them, I think they came out pretty darn good.
yeah, I definitely agree. And now that I think about it, I don't want to make it seem like it was all just completely gloom and doom immediately when I came out of the closet. Like overall, as a net positive, it was a net positive on my life. And a lot of those
Right.
changes were good. I guess my emphasis just when I was in the closet, my mindset was that I was afraid of like potential negative changes, and once those changes happen, they would become out of my control. But that being said, a lot of the changes that come with coming out are also great and wonderful. Like I cannot express enough how different my mindset, just overall mental health is, just being able to be myself instead of just pretending you're someone you're not. Like when I was in high school and even like early college, like a lot of like non LGBTQ people don't understand is just like the constant facade you have to put on in order to be in the closet is just a very mentally draining thing. And being able to fully lift that mask off once and for all is like one of the best things that's ever happened to me for sure.
Yeah, it definitely can be. I agree 100% to that, Zach.
Okay. Do we want to move on to one of our last questions?
Um, yeah. What's the last question that you'd like to ask?
So the last question I have here is, how do we approach the topics of sexual orientation and gender identity in social situations?
Hmm.
So I'm thinking of this as kind of like a broad concept. Um, I think it largely depends on what social situation you're talking about. I know one thing that a lot of people struggle with, and you can probably speak more to this, Amari, is like a lot of people, and it actually stems into what we were talking about earlier. Like some people will, they have their certain pronouns that they want people to use, and
Hmm.
some some people, especially in like older generations, aren't necessarily used to using either certain pronouns or just like different pronouns from what they perceive that they should be using. And I think navigating that in a social situation can be kind of tricky. And I mean, that's something even I like had to learn and struggle with because I myself am not, for example, like transgender or non-binary. I'm cisgender. But like navigating that in LGBTQ social spaces in terms of like pronoun use can be kind of challenging for some people. I don't know.
Hmm.
I feel like you would have like more to say on that than me.
Yeah, I think that I would be curious a little bit more with this question on more specifics to the context because yeah, it definitely makes me think similarly that um, about maybe pronouns or even the fact of using partner instead of gendering, like whether it's your boyfriend, your girlfriend,
Hmm.
or anything other than that. Um, and I think that conversations that happen and non-gender conforming language is used, automatically people think that I'm assuming that automatically some people think that there's some level of LGBTQ ness in in that context, where it doesn't necessarily have to be true. Um, I've heard cisgender partners who are not in the LGBTQ community use partner in referring to their binaries that are very much gender conforming, and it just to hear anything but my boyfriend or my girlfriend just gives a level of thinking. So I don't know. I don't know exactly how to answer it because I'm still intrigued. I think mimicking language is a good way to approach topics of sexual orientation or gender identity. Like if something comes up and it's something that you haven't heard before, like they them, like what does that mean? Or z them, what does that mean? Um, it may be organically an appropriate question to ask, depending on like what setting you're in, um, what's your relationship to that person. If it's somebody you don't know, um, maybe think about how you would feel about personal questions being asked to you from people you don't know and how they may respond to you asking something. I mean, I think that's why I want more context because there's so many ways, different ways to answer this question, depending
Yeah,
on
I
what that social
wish.
situation looks like.
Yeah, I almost wish we could like talk to this person and get more specifics in terms of like, because it almost sounds like they have like a few social situations that they've had in the past that they like want like more context on. So I almost like wish we like could have this person in the room, so to speak. Um, but going off on what you said, at the same time, yeah, like keep in mind that a lot of this information and these topics are very personal to some people. Like obviously in this context, me and Amari are comfortable talking about it because it's what we came here to do. But if you're just like in a normal social situation, you're hanging out with friends, there's someone you don't necessarily know that well, I would always be wary of asking them questions about some of these topics, because if I'm at a party and I'm having a drink and I'm just like trying to chill with friends, and I just mention the fact that I mentioned the fact that I have a boyfriend in passing, might not necessarily want someone to come up to me and be like, "Oh, wow, you're gay. What was your coming out story like?" Like dude, I'm just trying to have a margarita here. Like that's always something to keep in mind when navigating these social situations. And I mean, that's kind of a delicate balancing act, because if you're curious and want more education on these topics, I don't want to dissuade you from seeking out more information by all means. That being said, LGBTQ people, you have to take into account, are always people too, and sometimes we don't necessarily want to talk about a lot of this stuff in certain situations.
Right. That part, maybe in italicized font. Um, yeah, I think if there's any way possible, you could send us more information on like more context to that question, or if you have like follow up questions to that question, um, like to our responses to that question, I would I would totally be interested in having a further conversation about that. Because I think that's not always talked about informally. A lot of conversations about how to approach social interactions, and bringing up sexual identity and orientation, um, and gender expression and things like that in social situations kind of happens internally, like with friends. Um, so maybe that's a different conversation that we could have in the future.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And actually, that's a really good segue into. There were a few questions that were sent to us that I would say are too big. Like they could hold up an entire hour and hours long conversation on their own. So if
Mm-hmm.
you submitted a question through this survey that we did not address, don't necessarily be worried about it, because it's something that we might explore more in depth in the future, just because it's such a big, wide topic when it comes to LGBTQ stuff, that we want to make sure we do our due diligence and give it the proper amount of time that it deserves.
Yes, definitely. And I'm still excited to like get to those questions and give really thorough and have great conversation and give great answers and resources.
Agreed. Like this almost kind of serves as like a very cursory, broad type conversation when answering questions about LGBTQ stuff, and we hope to in the future maybe get a little bit more specific and nitty gritty about some of these topics that we've discussed and questions that we've received.
Yes. So stay tuned.
Indeed. And there were also a few questions submitted to us about like educational resources to help people who want to become LGBTQ allies. And a lot of that is going to be shared with this webinar. And there's going to be like links and resources and stuff that if you want to do any further reading, some of that stuff will be provided through this. And in addition, I'm sure our contact information is somewhere listed along with that as well. We have staff emails and phone numbers. So if you wanted to approach us about any further information about topics that we've discussed today, that would be a great way to do so.
Yes. Thanks for listening in, and we hope to hear from you soon.